My husband drained our joint accounts for his mistress, laughing that I'd be broke and helpless. 20 minutes later, he was in handcuffs when the bank president called me Mrs. CEO and revealed I controlled the entire financial institution he tried to steal from. "Just a housewife," he'd said. The look on Matt's face when his card was declined at the luxury hotel check-in was something I'll never forget. Standing there with his mistress, red-faced and stammering while I watched from across the lobby, having just frozen every account he thought he'd emptied. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 10 years of marriage, and he never once bothered to ask what I really did during my charity committee meetings. If he had, he might have realized those meetings were actually board sessions where I directed the very bank he was attempting to defraud. I remember the exact moment I decided to keep my professional identity separate from my marriage. It was at a dinner party shortly after we met, when Matt confidently told his friends I was just finishing up some accounting classes, when I'd actually just been appointed the youngest regional director in First National's history. The dismissive way he patted my hand that night told me everything I needed to know about how he viewed ambitious women. So I smiled and played along, curious to see how long it would take him to actually ask about my career. He never did. For a decade, he assumed my office job at the bank was some mid-level position that paid for my shopping habits, while his successful medical practice was our real financial foundation. My executive compensation package, which dwarfed his income by a factor of 10, went into separate accounts he knew nothing about. My name on the executive floor, my reserved parking space at headquarters, my leadership position, all completely unknown to the man who slept beside me every night, too self-absorbed to notice the signs that were everywhere. The truth is, I never planned to use my position against him. I kept our financial lives separate for my own peace of mind, not as some elaborate trap. But when my assistant called that Tuesday morning to tell me Matt was attempting to transfer our entire joint savings, nearly $300,000, I couldn't help but wonder what emergency would require such an action without even a text message to his wife. "He's with a woman," my assistant Donna whispered into the phone. "She doesn't look like his nurse or a patient. They're quite familiar with each other." I remember setting down my coffee cup, the boardroom around me suddenly silent as the other executives sensed something was wrong. "Put Frank from security on the phone," I said calmly, my mind already calculating exactly how this would play out. "And tell him to bring the transaction monitoring team. We may have a fraud situation to address." In the 10 minutes that followed, as Matt filled out withdrawal slips with the branch manager growing increasingly uncomfortable, I learned more about my husband's double life than in 10 years of marriage. The text messages the security team pulled from our network, the hidden account he'd been funneling money into for months, the flights he'd booked for 2 to Bora Bora using our joint credit card just that morning. Each revelation landed like a physical blow, but I remained perfectly composed as I issued the directives that would bring this charade crashing down. "Freeze all accounts under Matthew Reynolds immediately," I instructed, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Flag his credentials in the system as potentially compromised, decline any pending transactions, and have security meet me at the downtown branch. I'm going there now." "Yes, Mrs. CEO," Frank responded, using the nickname the staff had given me years ago. "And if Dr. Reynolds protests or becomes difficult?" I gazed out the window at the city skyline, the empire I'd built brick by brick while my husband remained oblivious. Then remind him that attempted bank fraud is a criminal offense, and that the decision to press charges rests entirely with bank leadership. I paused, straightening my blazer. With me. The drive downtown gave me just enough time to process what was happening. 10 years with a man who thought so little of me that he believed I would simply accept being left destitute while he ran off with another woman. 10 years of helping me understand our finances because banking was complicated, as if I hadn't transformed a struggling regional bank into one of the most successful financial institutions in the state. 10 years of nodding politely while he explained basic financial concepts to the woman who approved his mortgage. As I pulled into my reserved parking space, President and CEO emblazoned in bold letters, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken or defeated. She was powerful, composed, and about to reclaim her narrative after a decade in the shadows. As I pulled into my reserved parking space, President and CEO emblazoned in bold letters, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken or defeated. She was powerful, composed, and about to reclaim her narrative after a decade in the shadows. The bank's glass doors parted as I strode through, every employee's eyes following my movement across the marble floor. At the far end of the lobby, Matt was gesturing angrily at Marie, the branch manager, his voice rising with each declined attempt to access our accounts. Beside him stood a young woman, her discomfort growing as the scene escalated. "This is ridiculous," Matt shouted, oblivious to my approach. "I'm a premier customer. I want to speak to whoever's in charge right now." Marie's eyes flicked to mine, relief washing over her face. "That would be me," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. Matt spun around, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and finally, dawning horror as security guards positioned themselves discreetly behind him. "Sarah?" he stammered. "What are you doing here? There's some problem with our accounts." "Yes," I replied calmly. "There is a problem. Someone attempted to empty our joint savings and transfer the funds to an unauthorized account. The system flagged it as potential fraud." I turned to Marie. "Has Dr. Reynolds provided an explanation for the withdrawal?" Marie glanced nervously between us. "He said it was for an investment opportunity that needed immediate action." "I see." I turned to the young woman beside Matt, who was now trying to create distance between them. "And would you be the investment opportunity, Miss Elise?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "But he told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had taken everything in the settlement and he was starting over." I had no idea. The color drained from Matt's face as he realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. "Sarah, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Actually, it's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted, my patience finally exhausted. "It looks like attempted bank fraud, facilitated by the systematic deception of both your wife and your mistress." I turned to Frank. "Please escort Dr. Reynolds to your office while I decide whether to contact the authorities." As security moved toward him, Matt's disbelief turned to anger. "You can't do this. You can't just freeze our accounts. You're just a—" "A what, Matt?" I asked quietly, the entire lobby now silent. "Just a wife? Just an employee? Please finish that thought." For perhaps the first time in our marriage, Matt was speechless, finally seeing me clearly. The bank president, the CEO, the woman whose financial acumen he had dismissed for a decade. "Mrs. Reynolds," Frank said, breaking the silence. "How would you like us to proceed?" I studied my husband's face, searching for any hint of the man I thought I'd married. Finding none, I made my decision. "Call the police," I said. "And when they arrive, show them everything we found." 5 minutes later, Matt was escorted to the bank's security office while we waited for the police to arrive. Elise had dissolved into tears in the customer lounge, horrified to discover she'd been manipulated into a role in his scheme. As I watched this drama unfold from my position at Marie's desk, I felt strangely calm, like I was observing a play rather than the implosion of my marriage. The security office's glass walls gave me a clear view of Matt as he paced back and forth, occasionally gesturing emphatically into the air as if rehearsing his defense. For a brilliant surgeon, he was showing remarkably poor judgment, still believing he could talk his way out of this situation like he had so many others. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But bank fraud wasn't a forgotten anniversary or a missed dinner. It was a federal crime, with irrefutable electronic evidence. Mrs. Reynolds, Donna appeared at my side, tablet in hand. We've completed the initial audit of Dr. Reynolds' recent transactions. There's quite a pattern. I nodded, unsurprised. Men like Matt rarely make just one bad decision. Show me. The tablet displayed a 6-month history that told a damning story. Jewelry purchases, hotel bookings, cash withdrawals in increasing amounts, all timed to coincide with his medical conferences. The transfers had started small, just enough to fund their rendezvous without drawing attention, but had grown bolder as his exit plan took shape. The Bora Bora booking was made 3 weeks ago, Donna continued, swiping to reveal the itinerary. One-way tickets, a private villa for 6 months, with an option to extend. He wasn't planning to come back. I felt a strange detachment as I processed this information. 10 years of sharing a home, a bed, a life, and he had been plotting his escape for months, carefully extracting what he believed was our entire nest egg. What he didn't know was that the joint accounts he'd emptied represented less than 5% of our actual wealth. Has he attempted to contact anyone? I asked, watching as Matt finally sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He asked to call his lawyer, but when we mentioned the evidence of premeditated fraud, he changed his mind. Donna hesitated. He did ask to speak with you. Of course he did. Matt always believed in his ability to charm his way out of consequences. How many times had I watched him talk his way out of parking tickets, restaurant reservations, or hospital politics? His charisma was what had attracted me initially. That unwavering confidence that seemed to bend reality around his desires. Not yet, I decided. I want to see what else he says to Frank first. Through the glass, I could see Frank entering the security office with a folder of documents. Matt immediately straightened, his doctor persona sliding into place. Reasonable, authoritative, slightly condescending. I couldn't hear his words, but I recognized the expressions, the hand gestures, the head tilt he used when explaining complicated medical procedures to patients. Frank remained impassive, occasionally sliding documents across the table that caused Matt's confident facade to falter. The police should be here in approximately 10 minutes, Marie informed me quietly. Is there anything else you need in the meantime? I considered the question. What did I need? The past few hours had shattered the carefully constructed reality I'd inhabited for a decade. The husband who I thought merely underestimated me had actually been planning to abandon me entirely. Yes, I said finally. I'd like the contents of our safe deposit box brought up, please. Marie nodded and disappeared, returning shortly with the large metal box that contained our most important documents. I inserted my key, then entered the 6-digit code Matt had insisted we use, his medical license number, because it would be easier for me to remember. The irony wasn't lost on me as I lifted the lid. Inside were the expected items: our marriage certificate, property deeds, insurance policies, and a small collection of family jewelry. But as I sifted through the papers, I found something unexpected. A prenuptial agreement I had no memory of signing. Examining it closely, I immediately spotted my forged signature on a document stipulating that all assets acquired during our marriage would remain with the primary income earner in the event of divorce. Would you like some water, Mrs. Reynolds? Donna asked, noticing my expression change. No, I replied, my voice tightening as I placed the fraudulent document aside. I'd like our legal team here immediately. By the time the police arrived, I had a complete picture of what Matt had been planning. Not just an escape with his younger girlfriend, but a calculated financial coup designed to leave me with nothing while he began his new life. He had underestimated me on every level, not just my position, but my intelligence, my attention to detail, and my willingness to hold him accountable. 2 officers entered the bank, their presence immediately commanding attention in the hushed Lobby. I met them by the entrance, introducing myself as both the victim of attempted theft and the president of the institution where the crime had occurred. Their surprise was minimal. They were professionals after all, but I caught the flicker of appreciation in the female officer's eyes. "We understand you have evidence of attempted fraud," she said, notebook in hand. "More than attempted," I corrected. "We have documentation of months of fraudulent activity, culminating in today's effort to empty accounts, and we've just discovered what appears to be a forged prenuptial agreement." The officer's eyebrows rose. That would elevate the charges significantly. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision before me. Pursuing these charges would mean public exposure, of Matt's crimes certainly, but also of my decade-long choice to conceal my professional identity from my husband. The publicity could affect the bank, our families, my carefully cultivated reputation. But the alternative was unthinkable. The police officers took my statement with professional efficiency, their expressions remaining neutral as I detailed the full extent of Matt's deception. The female officer, Detective Kemp, occasionally glanced toward the security office where my husband sat, her eyes narrowing slightly each time I revealed another layer of his scheme. "So, to confirm, Mrs. Reynolds," she said, reviewing her notes, "you're stating that your husband attempted to withdraw nearly $300,000 from your joint accounts this morning, had booked one-way tickets to Bora Bora for himself and another woman, and you've just discovered what appears to be a forged prenuptial agreement in your safe deposit box." "That's correct," I replied, sliding the document across the desk. "I never signed this. The signature is close, but it's missing the slight upward curve I always include in my last name. And the witness signature is from Dr. Gordon Miller, a colleague of my husband's who died 3 years ago." Detective Kemp's partner whistled softly as he examined the document. "That's not just fraud, that's calculated premeditation. And attempting to clean out joint accounts before disappearing, that crosses multiple state and federal statutes." I nodded, the reality of the situation settling over me like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just a marital dispute or a husband's midlife crisis. This was criminal activity spanning months, possibly years. "Would you like a moment before we bring him in for questioning?" Detective Kemp asked, her voice softening slightly. I glanced at my watch, a Patek Philippe that Matt had given me for our 8th anniversary, ironically purchased with the bonus I'd received for the bank's record-breaking quarter. It was just past noon. The executive committee would be gathering for our weekly strategy meeting, wondering where their CEO had disappeared to without explanation. No, I decided. I'd like to be present for the questioning. As we entered the security office, Matt's head snapped up, relief flooding his features when he saw me. "Sarah, thank God. Will you please tell these people there's been a misunderstanding? This is ridiculous. They're treating me like a criminal." I took a seat across from him, folding, my hands on the table. For the first time in our marriage, I allowed myself to really look at him, not as the charming surgeon I'd fallen in love with, but as the man he truly was. His perfectly styled hair, the bespoke suit he insisted was necessary for patient confidence, the Rolex he'd purchased after his first successful private practice year. I had always admired his attention to detail, his commitment to appearance. Now I recognized it as the carefully constructed facade it was. "Matt," I said quietly, "I've just shown the police officers the prenuptial agreement you forged with my signature." The color drained from his face. His eyes flicked to the officers, then back to me, his mind visibly racing for an explanation, an excuse, anything to regain control of the situation. That's absurd," he stammered. "We signed that together, right after we got engaged. You were so excited about starting the marriage that you barely read it, remember? It was your idea to use Gordon as the witness because he was at that dinner party." I didn't respond immediately, noting how he attempted to color the lie with specific details, a tactic I'd seen him use countless times with hospital administrators when defending questionable decisions. I wondered how often he'd employed the same technique with me over the years. Gordon Miller died 3 years ago, I said finally. Yet this document is dated last year. Would you like to try again? Matt's jaw tightened, the facade cracking. Sarah, whatever you think is happening here. What's happening, I interrupted, is that you're being arrested for bank fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. What's happening is that your plan to abandon your wife destitute while you escaped with another woman has failed spectacularly. Destitute? Matt scoffed, a flash of his true self breaking through the panic. Don't be dramatic. You have your little job at the bank. I made sure you'd have something to occupy your time. Detective Kemp exchanged a glance with her partner, clearly recognizing the dismissive tone. I almost smiled at the dramatic irony of the moment. Matt still had no idea who he was actually speaking to. My little job, I repeated. I reached into my blazer pocket and removed my business card, sliding it across the table to him, Sarah Reynolds. President and Chief Executive Officer, First National Bank. Matt stared at the card, uncomprehending at first, then with dawning horror as the full implications washed over him. His eyes lifted to mine, searching for some sign that this was a joke, a mistake, anything but the truth. This is impossible, he whispered. You're an administrative assistant. You answer phones and schedule appointments. No, Matt, that's what you assumed I did, because you never actually asked. You never came to a single company event in 10 years of marriage. You never questioned why my administrative assistant salary could afford the art collection you so proudly showcased to your colleagues. You never wondered why bank executives sought me out at hospital fundraisers. Detective Kemp cleared her throat. Dr. Reynolds, I need to inform you that you're under arrest for attempted bank fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft. She began reciting his rights as her partner moved to handcuff him. Matt barely seemed to hear her, his attention fixed entirely on me. 10 years, he said, his voice hollow. For 10 years you let me believe. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, I replied evenly. When we met, I told you I worked at First National in executive leadership. You immediately assumed I meant as some kind of secretary. Rather than correct you, I decided to wait and see how long it would take you to actually ask about my career. You never did. But why? Why would you hide something like that? I didn't hide it, Matt. My name is on the building. My face is on the annual report. My position is mentioned in every financial publication in the state. You simply didn't pay attention to anything that didn't center you. As the officers prepared to escort him out, Matt's shock transformed into anger. So this whole time you've been what? Testing me? Playing some kind of game to prove I didn't care enough? I stood, straightening my jacket. No, Matt. I was simply observing. And what I observed over 10 years was a man so convinced of his own importance that he couldn't imagine his wife having an identity beyond her relationship to him. A man who planned to steal what he thought was every penny I had and leave me with nothing. Mrs. Reynolds, Detective Kemp interjected gently. We need to take him to the station now for formal processing. I nodded, suddenly feeling the emotional weight of the morning. 10 years of marriage ending in handcuffs and criminal charges. Not exactly the anniversary celebration we'd planned for next month. One last thing, I said, as the officers began leading Matt toward the door. Those accounts you tried to empty? They represent less than 5% of our actual assets. You weren't just cruel, Matt. You were careless. His face contorted with a mixture of rage and humiliation as the officers guided him through the bank lobby. Employees pretended not to watch as the husband of their CEO was escorted out in handcuffs, though I knew the story would spread through the building within minutes. As they disappeared through the front doors, Donna appeared at my side. The executive committee is waiting in the boardroom. I've informed them you're handling a security situation and will join shortly. I took a deep breath, compartmentalizing the personal tragedy from my professional responsibilities. Thank you. Donna, please also contact my attorney. It seems I'll be needing a divorce lawyer after all. The executive meeting progressed with remarkable normalcy, considering I had just had my husband arrested in the lobby of our flagship branch. My team was professional enough not to mention the commotion they'd undoubtedly heard about, focusing instead on quarterly projections and the upcoming merger with Western Trust. Only Donna, sitting quietly in the corner taking minutes, occasionally glanced at me with concern when she thought I wasn't looking. And finally, Frank concluded, closing his presentation folder, security protocols for the merger announcement have been enhanced following last quarter's market speculation. We've implemented the measures you requested, Mrs. Reynolds. I nodded, grateful for his discretion. Only Frank knew that the enhanced measures included monitoring Matt's communications after I'd noticed small inconsistencies in our joint accounts 3 months ago. That vigilance had ultimately revealed his relationship with Elise and the elaborate escape plan he'd been crafting. Thank you, everyone, I said, rising to signal the end of the meeting. Please make sure your departments are prepared for next week's regulatory review. As the room cleared, Gordon Harris, our chief legal officer, lingered behind. A friend from law school who had joined the bank shortly after I became COO, Gordon was one of the few people who knew the unusual arrangement of my marriage. I heard what happened, he said quietly once we were alone. The arrested husband is apparently quite the topic in the break room. They don't know it's yours yet. I sighed, removing my glasses to rub the bridge of my nose. It won't take long to connect the dots. Dr. Matthew Reynolds, husband of Sarah Reynolds. The press will have a field day once the arrest record becomes public. Gordon nodded, his expression grave. I've taken the liberty of calling Elise Marshall from Crisis Management. We should get ahead of this story before it breaks on its own terms. The thought of my private life becoming tabloid fodder made my stomach twist, but Gordon was right. In banking, perception was often as important as reality. A CEO who couldn't maintain order in her own marriage might be viewed as equally incapable of maintaining order in her institution. Thank you, I said, gathering my papers. Set up the meeting for... My phone buzzed with a text notification. Matt's mother. Why are the police at my house with a search warrant? What's happening, Sarah? Call me immediately. I showed the message to Gordon, who frowned. They're moving quickly. Must have been concerned about evidence tampering. Another text arrived, this one from a number I didn't recognize. This is Elise Winters, Matt's friend. They're letting me call one person before. They take my phone as evidence. I didn't know he was married. I swear I didn't know about any of this. I'm so sorry. The reality of how many lives were being upended crashed over me. Matt's parents, who had always been kind to me despite their son's subtle dismissal of my career. This young woman, Elise, who appeared to be as much a victim of Matt's deception as I was. The ripple effects were spreading outward, touching everyone in Matt's orbit. Sarah, Gordon's voice broke through my thoughts. You don't have to handle this alone. Let us help you. I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. Set up the crisis management meeting for 4 I need to make some calls first. Back in my office, I sank into the leather chair that had been my sanctuary for countless late nights and early mornings. On my desk sat a silver-framed photo from my wedding day, Matt and I beaming at each other, my expression open and trusting, his confident and assured. I turned the frame face down, no longer able to reconcile that hopeful bride with the woman I now knew myself to be. My direct line rang. The hospital administrator where Matt had surgical privileges. Mrs. Reynolds, I'm calling about a rather delicate matter concerning your husband, she began, her voice carefully neutral. You've heard about his arrest, I stated, unsurprised that news had traveled so quickly. Yes, she confirmed. We've placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. But there's another matter. A nurse has come forward with allegations of inappropriate behavior. In light of today's events, we're taking her claims more seriously than we might have otherwise. My hand tightened around the receiver. What kind of allegations? There was a pause. It seems Dr. Reynolds may have been engaged in multiple inappropriate relationships. The nurse in question believed they were exclusively involved and was distressed to learn about his plans with another woman. She's provided text messages that corroborate her account. Multiple relationships? Of course. The conquests of the brilliant surgeon, too important and desirable to be constrained by mere monogamy. I wondered if his patients knew that the steady hands they trusted might have been texting a mistress minutes before their procedures. I understand, I said finally. Please keep me informed of your investigation. And please extend my personal apology to the nurse. I had no knowledge of my husband's activities. After ending the call, I sat motionless, processing this newest betrayal. The Matt I thought I knew, dedicated surgeon, somewhat dismissive, husband, but fundamentally decent man, was dissolving before my eyes, revealing someone I hardly recognized. Had I been so focused on my own career that I'd missed the signs of his moral disintegration? Or had he always been this person, and I'd simply chosen not to see it? My office door opened as Donna entered with a stack of urgent documents requiring my signature. Her efficiency had been my salvation through countless crises, and now she moved with the same calm purpose as she organized the papers on my desk. The police called, she reported matter-of-factly. They've completed their initial search of your home and would like to know if you plan to return there tonight or if you'll be staying elsewhere. The thought of returning to the house Matt and I had shared, now potentially ransacked by police searching for evidence, was unbearable. Call the Four Seasons and arrange a suite, I decided. Indefinitely. Donna nodded, making a note. Also, your mother-in-law has called 6 times. She's quite insistent on speaking with you. I closed my eyes briefly. Eleanor Reynolds had always been kind to me, if somewhat bewildered by my career ambitions. The southern gentility that prevented her from openly questioning why her daughter-in-law would want to work such long hours at a bank when her son was a successful surgeon would now be shattered by the reality of her son in handcuffs. I'll call her after the crisis management meeting, I promised, though the prospect of that conversation filled me with dread. As Donna turned to leave, a thought occurred to me. Wait, what happened to the young woman who was with Matt? Elise? She gave her statement to the police and was released. She seemed quite devastated by the revelations. I nodded, surprisingly free of animosity toward the woman. By all appearances, she had been another victim of Matt's elaborate deceptions. If she calls again, put her through to me, I said, surprising myself with the decision. Left alone again. I turned to the window overlooking the city where I'd built my career while maintaining the fiction of being merely a supportive doctor's wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those hospital galas where I'd smiled politely as Matt's colleagues' wives asked what it was like being married to such an important man, never once asking about my own work or ambitions. I'd played the part, so convincingly that I sometimes wondered if I'd lost something of myself in the performance. Had I compromised too much in allowing Matt to believe what he wanted about me? Had my silence been wisdom or cowardice? The intercom buzzed, interrupting my reflections. Mrs. Reynolds, the crisis management team is ready whenever you are. Was time to face the public reckoning that would inevitably follow. The bank CEO, whose husband had attempted to defraud her own institution while planning to abandon her for another woman, or possibly several. The headlines would write themselves. I'll be right there, I replied, straightening my shoulders. As I prepared to navigate yet another crisis with the calm competence that had become my trademark. The time for hiding was over. For better or worse, the world was about to discover exactly who Sarah Reynolds really was. The crisis management meeting was brief but focused. Elise Marshall, our head of public relations, had already drafted 3 potential statements and identified key media contacts who would need personal calls before any public announcement. Her efficiency would have been impressive if I weren't so emotionally exhausted. The challenge, Elise explained, gesturing to the slide displaying potential headlines, is getting ahead of the sensationalism. Bank CEO's husband arrested for lie. Fraud is unavoidable, but we need to frame this as financial institutions' security measures successfully prevent fraud, rather than CEO's marriage implodes in public scandal. I nodded, appreciating her directness. What's your recommendation? Limited transparency. Acknowledge the personal connection, but emphasize the institutional response. Make it clear that the same processes that would protect any customer protected you. No special treatment. No exceptions. And my relationship with Matt? The fact that I concealed my position from my own husband for a decade? The room fell silent. It was the question everyone had been too polite to ask directly. Elise hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That's trickier. Traditionally, we'd advise presenting it as a privacy choice rather than a deliberate deception. But given the unusual circumstances, given that my husband is a narcissistic fraud who never bothered to learn what his wife actually did for a living, I finished for her, my tone sharper than intended. Gordon cleared his throat. Perhaps we position it as a professional boundary you maintained. Many executives separate their work and home lives. Not to this extent, Frank countered, ever the pragmatist. We can't pretend this isn't unusual. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. The professional crisis I could handle. I'd navigated the bank through the 2008 financial collapse, a ransomware attack, and a threatened hostile takeover. But the personal dimension made this different. More raw. More exposed. What if we don't explain it at all? I suggested finally. What if we simply acknowledge that yes, Dr. Reynolds is my husband, yes, he attempted to defraud the bank, and yes, our security measures functioned exactly as designed to protect all our customers, including me. No justifications for why he didn't know my position. No explanations about our marriage arrangement. Elise looked thoughtful. It's unconventional, but it might work. The less we try to explain, the less there is to sensationalize. The media will speculate regardless, Gordon added. But without fuel from us, the story will burn out faster. I turned to Frank, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. Security concerns? He frowned slightly. I'm more worried about practical matters. The police have secured your home as a potential crime scene. Your husband's assets are likely to be frozen during the investigation. Have you considered your immediate living situation? Donna's arranging a suite at the Four Seasons. And personal. Security? Once this breaks, there will be press attention. Possibly unwelcome. I hadn't considered that aspect. The idea of needing protection from journalists felt surreal. Another unexpected consequence of Matt's betrayal. Arrange whatever you think necessary, I conceded. But nothing obvious, no visible bodyguards. The meeting concluded with action items assigned and a timeline established. The official statement would be released tomorrow morning, following personal calls to board members and key investors tonight. The bank would operate normally, its CEO present and visibly in control despite her private turmoil. As the team filed out, Marie appeared at the door. Mrs. Reynolds, she said quietly, there's a Ms. Winters here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent. Elise Winters, the woman who had been with Matt at the bank this morning. The other woman, my replacement. Send her in, I decided, ignoring the surprised expressions around me. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-20s perhaps, with the nervous energy of someone finding themselves in a situation far beyond their control. Her mascara was smudged from crying, and she clutched her purse with white-knuckled fingers as she perched on the edge of the chair across from my desk. Mrs. Reynolds, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. I came to apologize in person. I had no idea Matt was married. He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had taken everything in a brutal settlement. I would never knowingly involve myself with a married man. I studied her face, searching for signs of deception but finding only genuine distress. How long have you known my husband, Ms. Winters? 4 months, she replied. We met at the hospital where I was visiting my father after his heart surgery. Matt was his surgeon. He asked me to coffee to discuss Dad's recovery, and things progressed from there. 4 months. While I was working 14-hour days finalizing the Western Trust merger, Matt had been seducing a patient's daughter. The revelation should have hurt, but I felt only a distant sort of disgust. He told me he was rebuilding his life after a difficult divorce. Elise continued. That his ex-wife had connections in the banking industry and had managed to take most of his assets. He said. She hesitated, looking embarrassed. Go on, I encouraged, morbidly curious about the narrative Matt had created. He said his ex was cold and career-obsessed, that she cared more about her job than their marriage, and that's why it failed. I feel so stupid now. The irony was almost laughable. Matt had essentially told the truth about me, career-focused, with banking connections, while recasting himself as the victim rather than the perpetrator. Ms. Winters, I said, I believe you were deceived just as I was, albeit in different ways. Matt Reynolds constructed elaborate fictions to serve his purposes, and we both accepted the versions of him that were presented to us. She looked up, clearly surprised by my lack of hostility. The police asked if I knew about the fraud, about his plans to take the money. I swear I didn't. He told me he had an investment opportunity that would secure our future. I never would have agreed to any of this if I'd known. I believe you, I said simply, and found that I meant it. Did Matt involve you in any financial decisions? Did he ask you to sign anything or act on his behalf? She shook her head. No, though he mentioned setting up accounts for us in Bora. Bora? He said it would be a fresh start, away from his controlling ex-wife and the pressures of his medical practice. A fresh start funded by my money, living in luxury while I presumably struggled to rebuild my life. The calculated cruelty of his plan was breathtaking. Ms. Winters, I don't blame you for my husband's actions, I said finally, but I would ask that if the police or prosecutors contact you again, you tell them everything you know. Matt manipulated both of us, and the truth is the only way forward. She nodded, visibly relieved. I will, and I'm truly sorry for everything. As she left, I realized something surprising. In this strange, painful day, Elise Winters was the only person who had offered a genuine apology for the harm done to me. Not my husband, not the bank officials who had processed his fraudulent requests without proper verification, not even my well-meaning crisis management team who were more concerned with institutional reputation than my personal well-being. The realization was both illuminating and isolating. I had built my career on being exceptionally self-sufficient, on never needing to be rescued or protected. Now, as both my marriage and my carefully constructed personal narrative crumbled around me, I wondered if that strength had become its own kind of vulnerability. By early evening, the initial shock had given way to a methodical response. The crisis management team had completed their preparations, security arrangements were in place at the Four Seasons, and I had personally called each board member to explain the situation before they heard it elsewhere. Most expressed appropriate concern, though I detected a subtle undercurrent of fascination in their responses. The dramatic personal life of their typically reserved CEO was clearly more interesting than quarterly projections. My executive, Assistant Donna, had efficiently packed an overnight bag from the items I kept at the office for late work nights. The police had indicated that my home would remain inaccessible for at least 24 hours while they completed their search. The thought of strangers pawing through my personal belongings, my clothes, my journals, the private spaces I had shared with Matt, filled me with a violated feeling that I struggled to suppress. "Your car is waiting, Mrs. Reynolds," Donna said, appearing at my office door. "Frank will accompany you to the hotel and ensure everything is arranged properly." I nodded, gathering my things. "Thank you. I'll be available by phone if anything urgent arises." "And the call from the district attorney's office?" I paused, having forgotten that particular message among the chaos of the day. What did they want? They wouldn't say specifically, but mentioned it was regarding Dr. Reynolds's case and the potential charges. They'd like you to come in tomorrow morning. More questions, more explanations, more public exposure of my private failure. I felt a wave of exhaustion at the thought, but nodded. Schedule it for 9 a.m. I want this addressed before the press statement goes out. In the executive elevator descending to the parking garage, Frank stood silently beside me, his presence both reassuring and a stark reminder of how drastically my circumstances had changed in a single day. This morning, I had awakened beside my husband of 10 years in our tastefully appointed home. Tonight, I would sleep alone in a hotel, surrounded by security personnel, while Matt occupied a jail cell. Mrs. Reynolds, Frank said as the elevator doors opened. I've taken the liberty of having your car checked for tracking devices or other surveillance equipment. Given Dr. Reynolds' apparent planning, we wanted to ensure you think he was spying on me? The idea hadn't occurred to me, but it made a disturbing kind of sense. Matt's plan required perfect timing. He needed to empty our accounts, leave the country, and disappear before I discovered the theft. We found nothing, Frank assured me quickly. But in situations like this, we prefer to be thorough. Situations like this? As if my circumstances were somehow common enough to have established protocols. I wondered how many other executives had experienced their spouses attempting to drain their accounts before fleeing the country with a lover. The black town car waited in my reserved parking space, driver standing at attention beside the open rear door. As I approached, my phone rang. Matt's mother again. I had been avoiding her calls all day, unsure of what to say, but I couldn't postpone the conversation indefinitely. I need a moment, I told Frank, who nodded and stepped away to give me privacy. Eleanor, I answered, forcing a calmness into my voice that I didn't feel. Sarah, what on earth is happening? Her southern accent was more pronounced than usual, a sign of her distress. The police have been searching Matthew's study for hours. They've taken his computer, his files, even his old medical school notebooks. They won't tell me anything except that it's related to financial crimes. I closed my eyes, hating that this kind woman was being dragged into the ugliness of her son's actions. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Matt attempted to empty our joint accounts this morning. The bank's fraud detection system flagged the transaction. Given the amount and pattern, it triggered an automatic law enforcement response. But that must be a mistake, she protested. Matthew wouldn't steal from you. There must be some explanation. The maternal instinct to defend her child regardless of evidence was both touching and frustrating. He was at the bank with another woman, Eleanor. They had one-way tickets to Bora Bora purchased for tomorrow morning. The silence that followed was heavy with realization. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, the certainty replaced by doubt. I don't understand. You two seemed so happy. Had we? I wondered. We had been polite, cordial, functioning as efficient partners in maintaining a pleasant household and social calendar. But happy? When was the last time Matt and I had shared anything meaningful beyond schedule coordination and household management? I thought we were, I said, the partial. Lie easier than explaining the complex reality of our marriage. I was blindsided by this too. Have you spoken to him? Has he explained? Not yet. The truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted his explanation. What could he possibly say that would make sense of this betrayal? Eleanor sighed, and I could picture her pressing a hand to her forehead in the gesture Matt had inherited. This isn't like him, Sarah. Something must have happened. Maybe he's having some kind of breakdown. I bit back the reflexive response that this was exactly like Matt, that his narcissism and entitlement had simply reached their logical conclusion. Instead, I offered the kindest truth I could manage. I don't know what happened, Eleanor, but I'm as shocked as you are. After promising to keep her informed of developments, I ended the call and joined Frank in the waiting car. As we pulled away from the bank building, I caught sight of my name on the executive parking sign, Sarah Reynolds, president and CEO, and wondered if Matt had ever noticed it during the rare occasions he'd visited the bank. Had he truly never made the connection, or had he deliberately maintained his fiction of my lesser position because it suited his self-image? The ride. To the Four Seasons passed in silence, the city lights blurring as I gazed out the window, mentally reviewing the events of the day. Something Eleanor had said kept repeating in my mind. This isn't like him. But was that true? Or had Matt always been capable of this level of deception, and we had both chosen not to see it? At the hotel, the staff were discreetly efficient, having been briefed that a high-profile guest requiring privacy would be arriving. The suite was elegant, but impersonal, with none of the comforts or familiarity of home. I thanked Frank, assured him I would call if I needed anything, and finally found myself alone. The silence was overwhelming. For the first time since discovering Matt's betrayal that morning, I had no immediate crisis to manage, no audience to maintain composure for, no practical matters requiring my attention. It was just me and the wreckage of my marriage, alone in a hotel room with a view of the city I had conquered professionally while failing spectacularly in my personal life. Slipped off my heels, padding across the plush carpet to the window. Below, the city continued its evening rhythm, unaware and unconcerned with my private drama. Thousands of lives intersecting, connecting, separating. How many other betrayals were unfolding tonight? How many other carefully constructed realities were crumbling in private pain? My phone buzzed with a text from Donna. They've arrested a second woman, another nurse from the hospital. She claims Matt promised to leave you for her months ago. A laugh escaped me, a sharp, bitter sound that startled me with its harshness. Of course there was another woman, probably more than one. Matt's ego wouldn't be satisfied with a single conquest. He needed constant validation, continuous affirmation of his desirability and importance. As I sank onto the edge of the immaculately made bed, the facade of control I had maintained all day finally cracked. 10 years of marriage to a man who had never truly known me, or perhaps worse, had never wanted to know me. 10 years of playing a role that diminished my accomplishments while elevating his. 10 years wasted on someone who had been planning to abandon me with nothing. For the first time since that morning, alone in the anonymous luxury of a hotel suite, I allowed myself to cry. Morning arrived with brutal efficiency, sunlight streaming. Through curtains I'd neglected to fully close. For a disorienting moment, I reached across the bed, expecting to find Matt's familiar warmth. Instead, my hand met cool, empty sheets, and reality came crashing back. My husband was in jail. I was in a hotel. Our life together had been revealed as an elaborate construction of half-truths and deliberate blindness. My phone showed 17 missed calls, the district attorney's office confirming our meeting, Eleanor seeking updates, Gordon with legal developments, and several numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed were journalists who had somehow gotten my private number. News traveled quickly in banking circles, and a scandal involving the CEO of First National would be impossible to contain for long. I showered and dressed with mechanical precision, selecting a charcoal gray suit that projected the exact blend of authority and restraint needed for a meeting with prosecutors. The woman in the mirror looked remarkably composed for someone whose personal life had imploded spectacularly just hours ago. Only the slight shadows beneath my eyes hinted at the sleepless night I'd spent alternating between anger and an unexpected grief. Mrs. Reynolds, good morning. Frank appeared in the hotel corridor as I exited my room, his presence both reassuring and a reminder of my new reality. The car is waiting. We've taken a different route to avoid the 2 news vans that were setting up outside the bank this morning. So it had begun. Thank you, Frank. Any other developments I should know about? He handed me a tablet with the morning's news summary. The story broke in the financial press about an hour ago. It's being reported as alleged financial improprieties involving the spouse of a banking executive for now. Your name hasn't been specifically mentioned yet, but it's only a matter of time, I finished for him, skimming the headlines. The business world was a small one, and the arrest of a prominent surgeon married to a bank CEO was too juicy to remain ambiguous for long. The district attorney's office occupied the 5th floor of a brutalist concrete structure downtown, its institutional grimness a stark contrast to the elegant efficiency of my bank headquarters. Assistant District Attorney Marie Gonzalez greeted me with a professional handshake and ushered me into a conference room where 2 other attorneys and a police detective waited. Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for coming in, Gonzalez began, her tone respectful but not deferential. We have some developments in your husband's case that we wanted to discuss with you directly. I nodded, maintaining the composed demeanor that had become my armor. Of course. As you know, Dr. Reynolds was initially arrested for attempted bank fraud and potential forgery related to the prenuptial agreement found in your safe deposit box. She opened a folder, removing several documents. Since then, our investigation has uncovered additional concerns. The detective, whose badge identified him as Lieutenant Davis, took over. We've executed search warrants on Dr. Reynolds' office, home study, and electronic devices. What we've found suggests this wasn't a one-time impulse, but rather a calculated plan that's been in development for at least 18 months. 18 months. That time frame struck me with particular force. 18 months ago, I had been promoted to CEO after 3 years as COO. The announcement had made the front page of the business section, my photograph prominently displayed beside. An article detailing my career trajectory. Matt had never mentioned seeing it. We've discovered multiple offshore accounts established under shell companies, Davis continued. Transfers totaling approximately $1.4 million from various sources, including your joint accounts, his medical practice, and, most concerning, what appears to be hospital foundation funds he had access to as a board member. The scope of Matt's deception expanded with each word, morphing from a personal betrayal into something far more extensive and calculated. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was reeling. How had I lived with this man for a decade and missed such fundamental character flaws? There's more, Gonzalez said, her tone gentling slightly. We've identified at least 3 women he was simultaneously involved with, all of whom believed they were in exclusive relationships. 2 were nurses at his hospital. The 3rd was the patient's daughter you encountered yesterday. Each was told a variation of the same story, that he was trapped in a loveless marriage to a cold, career-obsessed woman who had connections in banking that made divorce financially impossible. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so painful. Matt had essentially told the truth about my banking connections while completely fabricating the nature of our relationship and his motivations. In text messages recovered from his phone, Davis added, he told Ms. Winters that his controlling ex-wife had forced him to sign a punitive divorce agreement that left him struggling financially. He claimed he needed to recover his assets quietly before he could make their relationship public. A cold anger settled in my chest. Not only had Matt planned to steal from me, but he'd painted me as the villain in his narrative. A vindictive ex who had victimized him rather than the wife he was planning to abandon. We believe, Gonzalez continued, that Dr. Reynolds was planning to disappear permanently with the funds. The one-way tickets, the offshore accounts, the forged documents, establishing alternative identities we found in his office safe. These suggest he never intended to return. Alternative identities? I repeated, this new revelation momentarily breaking through my composed facade. Davis nodded, sliding a photocopy across the table. It showed a passport with Matt's photograph, but a different name, Daniel Matthews. We found 3 sets of identification documents, each with different names but all with his photo. Extremely high-quality forgeries. The man I had slept beside for 10 years had been preparing escape identities like a character in a thriller novel. The disconnect between the Matt I thought I knew, ambitious, somewhat self-absorbed, but fundamentally conventional, and this stranger who had created elaborate false identities was so profound that I struggled to reconcile them. "Mrs. Reynolds," Gonzalez said, watching me carefully, "given the extent of the fraud we're uncovering, this case has expanded significantly beyond the original charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office is now involved due to the interstate and potentially international nature of the financial crimes." I understood the implication immediately. This was no longer just a domestic matter or even a local criminal case. It was becoming a federal investigation with potential banking regulation implications. The professional consequences were now inextricably tangled with the personal ones. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil. "Beneath. For now, continued cooperation and discretion," Gonzalez replied. "We'll need detailed statements about your financial arrangements, access to relevant accounts, and information about your husband's activities over the past 2 years. The challenge is conducting this investigation thoroughly while minimizing institutional damage to the bank." There it was, the acknowledgement that my position made this case particularly sensitive. A bank CEO could not be associated with financial impropriety, even as a victim, without raising regulatory concerns. "I understand," I said. "My team has already prepared a complete financial disclosure package and timeline of relevant events. We anticipated these requirements." Gonzalez nodded, clearly unsurprised by my preparedness. "There's one more thing. You should know. Dr. Reynolds has requested to see you." The statement hung in the air between us. After everything I'd learned, the scope of his deception, the elaborate escape plan, the multiple women, the identity forgeries, Matt wanted to see me. For what purpose? To offer explanations? To make demands? To attempt manipulation? "He's been quite insistent," Davis added. "Claims there are things you don't understand about the situation." I almost laughed at the audacity. "I'm sure there are. Many things I don't understand about my husband, Lieutenant. His capacity for deception appears to have been substantially greater than I realized." The district attorney's office had arranged for a private exit to avoid the small cluster of reporters who had gathered at the main entrance. As Frank guided me through a service corridor toward the waiting car, I found myself in the strange position of being simultaneously a banking leader, a fraud victim, and a tabloid curiosity. The competing identities created a surreal disconnect, as if I were observing someone else's life unraveling instead of my own. "Mrs. Reynolds, the press statement is scheduled for release in 40 minutes, Elise Marshall's voice informed me through the car's speakerphone once we were safely inside. "All board members have been briefed, and we've prepared talking points for branch managers in case customers have questions." "And our major institutional clients?" I asked, watching the city pass by through tinted windows. "Gordon has personally contacted the top 20. All have expressed support, though Westlake Investments hinted they may want additional reassurance about our internal controls." Of course they would. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very systems that had detected and prevented Matt's fraud were now being questioned because of his relationship to me. The fact that our security protocols had worked exactly as designed seemed secondary to the sensational aspects of the case. "Schedule a call with Harrison James at Westlake for this afternoon," I instructed. "I'll handle it personally." The car phone clicked off as we turned onto the private entrance to the bank's underground parking. Frank had arranged for me to enter through the executive elevator, bypassing the main lobby where employees and possibly reporters might be watching for my arrival. The consideration was appreciated, though part of me bristled at the implication that I had something to hide. Once, in my office, I found myself with an unexpected 15 minutes of solitude before my executive team arrived for our emergency meeting. Standing at the window overlooking the financial district, I allowed myself a rare moment of unguarded reflection. Matt wanted to see me. After orchestrating an elaborate betrayal that extended far beyond what I'd initially understood, he was requesting a meeting. The arrogance was breathtaking. Did he truly believe he could explain away multiple fake identities? Offshore accounts? Relationships with at least 3 other women? Yet beneath my indignation, I felt a disturbing pull of curiosity. What possible explanation could he offer? What narrative had he constructed in his mind that justified such calculated deception toward the woman he'd shared a home with for a decade? A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts as Donna entered with a silver tray holding a porcelain teapot and cup, my preferred Earl Grey that she prepared each morning. The familiar ritual felt incongruously normal amid the chaos. "Thank you, Donna," I said, accepting the cup. "Any messages I should know about?" Her expression tightened slightly. "Several reporters have called. I've directed them to Ms. Marshall, as instructed. And..." She hesitated. "Your mother-in-law has called 3 times this morning. She's quite distraught. Eleanor." In the whirlwind of revelations, I'd neglected to call her back. The guilt was immediate and surprising in its intensity. Whatever Matt had done, his mother was innocent, a collateral victim in the destruction he'd wrought. "I'll call her after the executive meeting," I promised. "Also, could you have the IT department check my personal devices? Given what we've learned about Matt's activities, I'd like to ensure there's no surveillance software installed." Donna nodded, unflappable as always. "Already arranged. They'll require your phone for approximately 30 minutes during lunch." Of course she had anticipated this need. For a fleeting moment, I wondered what my life would be like if Matt had shown even a fraction of Donna's attentiveness to my actual circumstances rather than the fiction he'd created about me. The executive meeting that followed was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of institutional stability. Each department head reported on potential impacts, mitigation strategies, and customer communication plans. The unspoken message beneath the professional presentations was clear. The bank would weather this storm because its CEO remained firmly in control, regardless of her personal trials. "And finally," Gordon concluded, "we've prepared a statement for the regulatory bodies explaining the situation and detailing the security measures that identified the attempted fraud. We're positioning this as evidence of our system's effectiveness rather than a potential vulnerability." "Good," I nodded. "What about the media narrative? Elise, what are we seeing?" Elise Marshall tapped her tablet, projecting several headlines onto the conference room screen. "Bank CEO's husband arrested in fraud scheme. Doctor spouse of financial executive charged with multiple crimes. High-profile surgeon allegedly attempted to drain accounts before. Fleeing country." So far, the coverage remains factual, she analyzed. But the social media speculation is more problematic. There's significant curiosity about why Dr. Reynolds didn't know about your position at the bank. Some commentators are creating quite elaborate theories. I could imagine the mysterious CEO who kept her own husband in the dark about her true role would make for irresistible speculation. The public loved nothing more than successful women with complicated personal lives. It confirmed their suspicion that female achievement must come at some private cost. "Stick to the facts," I instructed. "My husband attempted to defraud the Saie Bank. Our security systems identified the suspicious activity. Appropriate actions were taken. My position as CEO is irrelevant to how these systems function for all our customers." My phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, it's Matt. They're letting me use the phone briefly. Please come see me. There are things you don't understand. Things I need to explain in person. Please." The audacity was breathtaking. After everything he'd done, he still believed himself entitled to my time, my attention, my willingness to listen. The text illuminated the fundamental character flaw that had likely driven his entire scheme, an unshakable belief that his desires superseded all other considerations, including law, ethics, and basic human decency. I placed the phone face down, on the table, refocusing on the meeting. Are there any other matters requiring immediate attention? Frank cleared his throat. One security concern, Mrs. Reynolds. We've identified unusual access attempts to the bank's executive personnel database over the past 3 months. Someone was specifically targeting your personal information and security clearances. A chill ran through me. Matt? We believe so. The attempts came from his home office IP address and hospital computer. He wasn't successful in breaching any secured systems, but the pattern suggests he was attempting to gather information about your administrative access to bank functions. The implications were staggering. Matt hadn't just been planning to empty our joint accounts, he had been actively attempting to access my executive credentials, potentially to bypass security measures or create larger fraudulent transactions. The betrayal expanded with each new revelation, morphing from personal to professional, from hurtful to potentially catastrophic. Review all my access credentials and security protocols, I instructed. Change everything. Passwords, authentication, methods, access points. If he was targeting my administrative access, we need to assume he may have obtained partial information. As the meeting concluded, I remained seated, allowing the team to file out while I gathered my thoughts. The Matt I had married, or thought I had married, was dissolving with each new disclosure, replaced by someone calculating and predatory. A stranger who had slept beside me for years while plotting elaborate deceptions. Should I see him, as he requested? What possible explanation could justify what he'd done? And yet, some stubborn part of me wanted answers only he could provide. Not for reconciliation, that bridge had been thoroughly incinerated, but for closure, for understanding. Donna appeared at the door. Mrs. Reynolds, your mother-in-law is on line 1. I nodded, reaching for the phone. Some conversations couldn't be postponed indefinitely, no matter how difficult they might be. Eleanor? I answered, bracing myself for whatever emotional storm awaited. Sarah, thank God. Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I've just come from seeing Matthew at the detention center. I tensed, wondering what version of events Matt had presented to his mother. Had he cast himself as the victim? Portrayed me as the vindictive career woman punishing him for some imagined slight? How is he? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Not well, Eleanor replied, her southern accent more pronounced in her distress. He's confused, Sarah, disoriented, saying things that don't make any sense. This wasn't what I had expected. What kind of things? He keeps insisting that someone is framing him, that his computer was hacked. He says he didn't set up those accounts they found, that someone is trying to destroy him professionally because of a patient who died last year. She paused, her voice dropping. Sarah, I'm worried he's having some kind of breakdown. This isn't like Matthew. Again, that phrase, this isn't like Matthew. The stubborn refusal to acknowledge that perhaps this was exactly like Matthew, that the charming surgeon had always been a carefully constructed facade concealing something darker. The evidence is quite substantial, Eleanor, I said gently. Multiple accounts, forged documents, fake identities. I know what they're saying, she responded, a defensive edge entering her voice. But you know Matthew. He's dedicated his life to helping people. He saves lives every day. Does that sound like someone who would do the things they're accusing him of? The irony was painful. I had lived with Matt for 10 years and had apparently never truly known him at all. His mother's certainty about his character seemed both touching and delusional in the face of the mounting evidence. People are complex, Eleanor, I said, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes they show different sides of themselves to different people. He's asking to see you, she continued, either missing or ignoring my point. He says you're the only one who will understand what's really happening, that it all has to do with the Winters case last year. I froze, my attention suddenly sharpened. The Winters case? Yes, Some patient who died during surgery. Matthew says the family has connections and they're behind all this. Eleanor's voice took on a pleading quality. Sarah, I know things have been difficult between you two lately, but he needs you now. He's frightened and confused. The Winters case. Elise Winters had been at the bank with Matt yesterday, the young woman whose father had been Matt's patient. The coincidence was too striking to ignore. I'll consider visiting him, I said, my mind racing with this new information. I need to check some things first. After ending the call, I immediately summoned Frank to my office. I need everything you can find on a patient named Winters who died under Matt's care last year. And I need to know more about the daughter, Elise Winters, the young woman who was with him at the bank yesterday. Frank looked surprised but nodded. I'll have the information within the hour. While waiting, I reviewed the bank's internal investigation report on Matt's attempted withdrawal. The sequence of events was clear. He had arrived at the downtown branch at 9:17 a.m., accompanied by Elise Winters. He had requested a withdrawal of $287,500 from our joint savings account, an amount just under the $300,000 threshold that would have triggered additional verification under banking regulations. The transaction had been flagged, not because of the amount, but because it matched a pattern of suspicious withdrawals over the previous 3 months. What if there was something to Matt's claims of being framed? Not the multiple affairs. Those seemed undeniable given the text messages and witness statements. But the financial crimes? The forged identities? Could someone have orchestrated this elaborate scheme to destroy him? The rational part of my mind rejected the idea. The evidence was too comprehensive, the planning too detailed. Yet a small voice of doubt persisted. In 10 years of marriage, despite his dismissiveness and narcissism, I had never known Matt to be criminal. Arrogant, yes. Self-absorbed, certainly. But capable of identity theft and elaborate financial fraud? Frank returned sooner than expected, tablet in hand. Mrs. Reynolds, I think you need to see this immediately. The screen displayed a news article from 14 months ago. Prominent surgeon Dr. Matthew Reynolds, cleared in wrongful death investigation. Hospital board finds no evidence of negligence in Winters' case. Harold Winters, 67, died during a routine cardiac procedure performed by Dr. Reynolds, Frank summarized. The family filed a wrongful death lawsuit claiming negligence, but the hospital review board cleared Matt of any wrongdoing. The case was dismissed 6 months ago. And the daughter? Elise Winters? Frank swiped to another screen. That's where it gets interesting. The daughter who was with Dr. Reynolds yesterday is not named Elise. Harold Winters' daughter is named Amanda Winters, age 31, an investment banker with Morgan Stanley. I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. Show me a photograph. Frank turned the tablet toward me, revealing a professional headshot of a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes. Someone who bore no resemblance to the tearful young woman who had sat in my office yesterday, the woman who came to the bank with Matt, who later visited me claiming to be Elise Winters. She's an imposter. Frank nodded grimly. It appears so. And there's more. The real Amanda Winters left Morgan Stanley 4 months ago to start her own financial consulting firm. Her first major client? Western Trust Bank. The same bank we were in the process of acquiring. The connections were starting to form an alarming pattern. Check the background of the 2 nurses who came forward claiming relationships with Matt, I instructed. And I need to know if there have been any unusual trading patterns in our stock over the past 3 months. As Frank left to gather the information, I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. What if Matt had been telling the truth, at least partially? What if someone was using his personal failings to orchestrate a larger scheme? The timing was suspicious. Our acquisition of Western Trust had been kept strictly confidential, with only the board and senior executive team aware of the full details. If completed, the merger would make First National the dominant financial institution in the region, significantly impacting competitors and potentially disrupting several major investment portfolios. My phone rang. The district attorney's office. Mrs. Reynolds, we've encountered some irregularities in the evidence against your husband. Marie Gonzalez began without preamble. The offshore accounts we identified, they were created using Dr. Reynolds' credentials, but the IP addresses trace back to servers associated with a financial services firm, not to his home or office. Let me guess, I said. A firm connected to Amanda Winters? There was a startled pause. How did you know that? I need to see my husband, I decided, the pieces falling into place with alarming clarity. Immediately. Matt was still a philanderer, still a narcissist who had likely been planning to leave me, still someone who had repeatedly belittled my career and capabilities. But perhaps he wasn't a master criminal after all. Perhaps he was simultaneously perpetrator and victim, his actual infidelities providing perfect cover for a more sophisticated financial scheme orchestrated by someone with a vengeful agenda and insider knowledge of our banking operations. As I gathered my things to leave for the detention center, my phone pinged with an urgent message from Gordon. Trading alert. Unusual volume of short positions being taken against First National. Stock in the past hour. Someone's betting big that our value is about to drop dramatically. The trap was springing closed, and I had nearly walked right into it. My husband's betrayal had been weaponized as part of a larger financial attack, one that required the bank's CEO to be personally and professionally compromised at the exact moment when our largest acquisition was most vulnerable. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt my strategic mind fully engage, the personal hurt and confusion giving way to cold, analytical clarity. Someone had made a critical mistake in their calculations. They had assumed that the personal humiliation of Matt's betrayal would cloud my professional judgment, leaving the bank exposed during a crucial transition. They had underestimated exactly the wrong woman. The county detention center existed in stark contrast to the polished, elite environments I typically navigated. Cold fluorescent lighting cast a sickly pallor over institutional green walls as I was led through a series of security checkpoints, each one stripping away another layer of the dignity and authority I carried in the outside world. No special treatment was offered to the CEO of First National Bank here. Just the same metal detectors, bag searches, and brisk procedural instructions given to every visitor. I was escorted to a private attorney-client room rather than the standard visitation area, a small concession arranged by our legal team that would allow a conversation without monitoring or recording. The guard unlocked the heavy door, revealing a small space containing only a metal table bolted to the floor and two uncomfortable-looking chairs. 15 minutes, he informed me curtly, before stepping back to allow Matt to enter from the connecting door. The man who walked into the room barely resembled the confident surgeon I had lived with for a decade. Matt's usual immaculate appearance had given way to the institutional reality of detention. The designer suit replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his precisely styled hair disheveled, the manicured hands now fidgeting without purpose. Only when he looked up and saw me did a flash of his usual self-possession return. "Sarah," he breathed, relief washing over his features. "You came." "Sit down, Matt," I instructed, taking the chair across from him. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands suggesting either medication, withdrawal, or extreme stress. He complied, leaning forward urgently. "Sarah, I know how this looks, but you have to believe me. I'm being set up. Yes, I made mistakes, terrible ones, but I'm not a criminal." I studied his face, searching for the tells I'd learned to recognize over our years together. The slight tightening around his eyes when he was lying, the excessive hand gestures when exaggerating, the way his gaze would shift slightly right when constructing a narrative rather than recalling actual events. None were present now, just raw desperation and what appeared to be genuine fear. Tell me about Amanda Winters, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Confusion crossed his features. Harold Winters' daughter. What does she have to do with this? The woman at the bank with you yesterday claimed to be Elise Winters. She later came to my office, tearfully apologizing for her affair with you. She doesn't match the description or photographs of Amanda Winters. Matt's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. The woman I was with yesterday is named Elise Collins. I met her 4 months ago at the hospital. She was never introduced to me as having any connection to Harold Winters. He ran a hand through his hair, agitation building. Sarah. Harold Winters died during a procedure last year. It was a known risk. He had been rejected by 3 other surgeons before I agreed to operate. The family filed a lawsuit claiming negligence, but the hospital review cleared me completely. And since then, I prompted. Since then, I've received anonymous threats, had patient records mysteriously altered, found equipment tampered with before. Procedures. His voice dropped lower. 3 months ago, I began seeing irregularities in our joint accounts, small transfers I hadn't authorized, password reset attempts on my email. I thought I was just being careless, forgetting things, due to stress. I kept my expression neutral, testing his account against what we'd discovered. What about the offshore accounts in your name? The forged identity documents? I didn't create any offshore accounts, he insisted, and I've never forged any documents. The first I heard about any of this was when they arrested me. He leaned forward, his voice intense. Sarah, I was going to leave you. I won't lie about that. Things between us haven't been right for years. We've been living separate lives under the same roof. But I wasn't planning to steal from you. The admission of his planned departure should have hurt, but instead it felt like confirmation of a truth I'd long suspected. Our marriage had been hollow for years, both of us going through the motions while maintaining a facade of conjugal compatibility. What about the money you were withdrawing? The tickets to Bora Bora? Matt's expression clouded. Elise, or whatever her real name is, told me she had an investment opportunity that required immediate cash. She said her father's estate had finally been settled, but the funds were tied up in some kind of holding pattern. If I could provide temporary capital, I'd double my investment within 6 months. He gave a bitter laugh. Classic con, right? I should have seen through it immediately. And you were planning to join her in Bora Bora? Yes, he admitted, having the grace to look ashamed. I was going to call you from there, tell you I wasn't coming back. It was cowardly, I know. The pieces were coming together now. Matt's actual infidelity and planned departure had provided perfect cover for a more sophisticated financial scheme. His moral failings made the criminal allegations completely plausible. Who would question that a man cheating with multiple women might also be embezzling funds? The real Amanda Winters started a financial consulting firm 4 months ago, I informed him. Her primary client is Western Trust Bank. The institution First National is currently in negotiations to acquire. If our stock price falls significantly, in the next 48 hours, the deal will collapse. Understanding dawned in Matt's eyes. They're using me to get to you, to the bank. It appears so. Someone is taking massive short positions against First National stock today, betting that our value is about to plummet. A bank CEO whose husband is arrested for fraud, whose personal judgment and professional oversight are suddenly questioned. That would certainly trigger a confidence crisis. The timing, Matt said, his medical mind shifting to diagnostic mode despite his circumstances. This whole thing accelerated yesterday because we were scheduled to announce the Western Trust acquisition tomorrow morning, I confirmed. Once that happens, our stock will likely jump 15–20%, making any short positions extremely costly. Matt sat back, the full picture finally clear to him. So I was targeted because I'm your husband, but also because I had a professional vulnerability they could exploit, the Winters case. You were targeted because you made yourself vulnerable, I corrected, unwilling to completely absolve him. The affairs, the deception, the planned abandonment, those were all real choices you made. They simply provided the perfect foundation for someone to build a more elaborate fraud. He nodded, accepting the harsh truth. What happens now? I glanced at my watch, calculating the time remaining before markets closed. Now I need to return to the bank and implement countermeasures. The district attorney's office is already reviewing the evidence inconsistencies, but the financial damage could be done before they reach any conclusions. As I stood to leave, Matt looked up at me, his expression more genuine than I had seen in years. Sarah, I'm sorry. Not just for this mess, but for everything. For never seeing who you really are. For being too self-absorbed to notice my wife was running a financial institution while I was lecturing her about balancing a checkbook. A rueful smile touched his lips. The CEO of First National. I still can't quite believe it. That's been our problem all along, Matt, I replied, a weight lifting as I finally spoke this truth aloud. You never bothered to believe it, even when the evidence was right in front of you. As the guard opened the door to escort me out, Matt called after me. Sarah, whoever's behind this, they have no idea who they're dealing with, do they? For the first time in days, I felt a genuine smile form. No, I replied. They absolutely don't. Walking out of the detention center into the bright afternoon sunlight, I was already formulating our counterattack. It was time to reveal exactly who Sarah Reynolds really was, not just to my husband, but to everyone who had underestimated the woman behind the CEO title. The car ride back to the bank was a focused blur of activity. Using the secure line, I convened an emergency response team, issuing rapid-fire directives that would form our counteroffensive. Gordon, I need you to contact the SEC immediately. Report suspicious trading activity in our stock, specifically, the short positions taken in the last 3 hours. Highlight the connection to Western Trust and Amanda Winters. Already monitoring the trading patterns, Gordon confirmed. The volume is significant. Over 2 million shares shorted since. Noon. Frank, assemble everything we have on the Winters family, particularly Amanda. I want financial records, corporate connections, communication with Western Trust executives, and I need the identity of the woman who claimed to be Elise Winters. Facial recognition, security footage, everything. Working on it now, Frank responded. Preliminary facial recognition from our branch cameras suggests she might be Vanessa Crane, a financial consultant who previously worked with Amanda Winters at Morgan Stanley. The pieces were falling into place with alarming clarity. This wasn't just about Matt, or even about me personally. This was a sophisticated attempt to derail the Western Trust acquisition by manufacturing a scandal that would undermine confidence in First National's leadership and tank our stock value at the critical pre-announcement juncture. Elise, I continued, addressing our PR director, prepare an alternative press statement. We're changing strategies completely. What direction are we taking? She asked. I took a deep breath, making the decision that would define both my personal and professional future. Full transparency. We're going to reveal the attempted manipulation of our stock price through the orchestrated scandal involving my husband. Instead of playing defense, we're taking control of the narrative. That's unprecedented, Elise responded, caution evident in her voice. It could backfire spectacularly if we don't have irrefutable evidence. Which is why we have exactly 90 minutes to assemble that evidence, I replied firmly. The markets close at 4 SAC. We need to make our announcement by 3:30 to prevent further short selling and trigger a reversal. As we pulled into the bank's underground garage, I noticed additional security personnel stationed at strategic points, Frank's team responding to the elevated threat level. The executive elevator whisked me directly to the crisis management center that had been established in the conference room adjacent to my office. Donna met me at the door, her usual calm efficiency now charged with urgent purpose. The district? Attorney's office called twice while you were gone. They've found significant irregularities in the evidence against Dr. Reynolds, and this just arrived from the forensic team. She handed me a tablet displaying a detailed analysis of the documentation found in Matt's office. The report confirmed what I had begun to suspect. The forged identity documents had been created recently, using sophisticated methods that weren't consistent with Matt's capabilities or resources. More tellingly, the digital trail led back to a series of anonymous servers that matched those used to establish the fraudulent offshore accounts. Mrs. Reynolds, Frank approached with another tablet. We've identified Vanessa Crane. She's currently employed by Wintercrest Financial, a boutique consulting firm established by Amanda Winters 4 months ago. Their client list includes 3 direct competitors who would be negatively impacted by our acquisition of Western Trust. And the nurses who claimed relationships with Matt? Frank's expression tightened. One appears legitimate. Jessica Morris has worked at the hospital for 5 years and confirms a brief relationship with Dr. Reynolds last year. The other, Marie Donovan, joined the hospital staff just 3 months ago. Her credentials check out, but her background is suspiciously light on details. We're still investigating. So at least part of Matt's philandering was genuine. Not surprising, given what I knew of his character. But the elaborate financial fraud, the multiple relationships, the forged documents, those appeared to be an opportunistic exploitation of his actual moral failings. Gordon, I called across the room where our legal counsel was engaged in an intense phone conversation. What's the SEC saying? He ended his call and approached, his expression grave but determined. They're opening an investigation into the trading patterns. The volume and timing are suspicious enough to warrant immediate attention. They've agreed to issue a temporary trading halt on our stock if we request it. I shook my head. No halt. That would only confirm to the market that something is seriously wrong. We need to change the narrative, not hide from it. The room had filled with key personnel from legal, security, communications, and executive. Leadership, all waiting for my decision on how to proceed. The weight of responsibility was familiar, but intensified by the personal dimensions of this crisis. My marriage, my reputation, and potentially the entire Western Trust acquisition hung in the balance. Here's what we're going to do, I announced, my voice steady as I outlined our counter-strategy. First, we accelerate the Western Trust announcement to today, before market close. Second, we simultaneously release evidence of the attempted market manipulation scheme targeting our stock. Third, we issue a personal statement addressing my husband's situation directly, acknowledging his personal failings while clearly separating them from the criminal allegations that appear to have been fabricated. I turned to Elise. The message needs to be clear. First National's security systems detected and prevented fraud, exactly as they're designed to do. My husband's personal indiscretions are regrettable, but entirely separate from the apparent attempt to manipulate our stock price ahead of a major acquisition. The personal disclosure is risky, Gordon cautioned. It exposes vulnerabilities that could be exploited. No, I countered firmly. The vulnerability was in the secrecy. By bringing everything into the open, both the personal and professional dimensions, we diffused the weapon our opponents were planning to use against us. My phone buzzed with a text from the district attorney's office. New evidence confirms. Offshore accounts were created remotely. Dr. Reynolds' credentials were compromised. Investigating connection to Wintercrest Financial. Possible release pending. I showed the message to Gordon, whose eyebrows rose appreciatively. This changes things. If Matt is released today, it substantially strengthens our counter-narrative. For the next 45 minutes, the team worked with focused intensity, assembling evidence, drafting statements, coordinating with regulatory authorities, and preparing for what would be the most consequential press announcement of my career. The atmosphere crackled with purpose. The initial shock and defensive posture replaced by strategic resolve. At 3:15, Donna entered with the final drafts of our statements and the latest market update. First National stock has dropped 8% since the rumors began circulating this morning. The short positions have increased to nearly 3 million shares. I nodded, reviewing the documents one last time. And the Western Trust executives? On standby. For the joint announcement. They're understandably concerned but still committed to the deal. Good. It's time. The executive team assembled in the formal media room, where a podium bearing the First National logo awaited. Camera crews from major financial networks had been summoned for an urgent announcement regarding market activity. Deliberately, vague language that ensured their attendance without revealing our strategy. As I prepared to step before the cameras, Gordon approached with one final update. The SEC has identified the primary sources of the short selling, 3 hedge funds with direct ties to Amanda Winters. They've agreed to issue a statement supporting our market manipulation claims. I straightened my jacket, a strange calm settling over me. In the past 24 hours, I had discovered my husband's infidelity, seen him arrested, watched our accounts nearly drained, found evidence of an elaborate financial conspiracy, and now stood ready to address it all publicly. The woman who had carefully separated her professional and personal identities for a decade was about to deliberately shatter that barrier. "Mrs. Reynolds," Frank said quietly as I moved toward the podium, "your husband has been released. The DA dropped the most serious charges pending further investigation." I nodded, absorbing this final piece of information. "Thank you, Frank." The lights of the camera crews illuminated the podium as I took my position, facing not just the assembled media, but the defining moment of both my career and my personal life. The time for hiding, for being underestimated, for allowing others to define me was over. With perfect composure, I began to speak. "Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Reynolds, President and CEO of First National Bank. I've called this press conference to address 3 significant matters. First, an apparent attempt to manipulate our stock price through coordinated fraudulent activities. Second, the advancement of our previously scheduled announcement regarding Western Trust Bank. And third, recent events involving my husband, Dr. Matthew Reynolds." The assembled journalists leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't going to be a standard corporate statement. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as I continued, my voice steady and authoritative. "Let me begin with the most important information for our investors and customers. First National Bank has detected and is currently working with federal authorities to investigate what appears to be a coordinated attempt to manipulate our stock price through the fabrication of fraudulent activities allegedly committed by my husband." I paused, allowing the murmurs to rise and fall before continuing. "Specifically, evidence indicates that individuals with connections to companies that would be negatively impacted by our acquisition of Western Trust Bank engineered a series of events designed to create a false scandal, undermine confidence in First National's leadership, and drive down our stock price at a critical moment." The room had fallen completely silent, all eyes fixed on me as I methodically outlined the scheme. The compromised credentials, the falsified documents, the impersonation of Elise Winters, the connection to Amanda Winters and her financial consulting firm, and the suspicious short-selling activity that had accelerated throughout the day. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened an investigation into the trading patterns and has identified 3 hedge funds with direct connections to parties who would benefit from derailing our acquisition of Western Trust. Their preliminary findings support our assertion that this was a deliberate attempt at market manipulation through the weaponization of personal information. I turned to the second announcement, my tone shifting to one of calculated confidence. Which brings me to our second piece of news. First National Bank and Western Trust have agreed to accelerate our merger announcement in light of these manipulation attempts. I'm pleased to announce that as of market opening tomorrow, First National will begin the process of acquiring Western Trust Bank in a transaction valued at $4.2 billion, creating the region's largest and most stable financial institution. Flashbulbs erupted as journalists captured what would undoubtedly be tomorrow's business section headline. I waited for the initial reaction to subside before addressing the final, most personal aspect of my statement. Finally, I want to address the situation regarding my husband, Dr. Matthew Reynolds, who was arrested yesterday on suspicion of financial fraud and subsequently released today as new evidence came to light. This was the moment, the deliberate dismantling of the barrier I had maintained between my professional and personal lives for a decade. I could feel the weight of every word as I continued. The evidence now suggests that while Dr. Reynolds was engaged in personal indiscretions that affected our marriage, the criminal financial activities attributed to him appear to have been fabricated by third parties who compromised his accounts and credentials. I looked directly into the cameras, abandoning the traditional corporate reserve for something more authentic. For those wondering why my husband was apparently unaware of my position as CEO of this institution, the explanation is simple. Early in our relationship, Dr. Reynolds made assumptions about my role at the bank that I chose not to correct. Over time, this evolved into an unusual arrangement where my professional identity remained largely separate from our marriage. A reporter called out, unable to contain himself. "Are you saying your husband didn't know you were the CEO of First National for 10 years? I allowed myself a small, measured smile. What I'm saying is that some people see only what they expect to see. My husband expected to see just a wife with a minor banking position, and so that's all he saw, despite my name on the building and my photo in the annual report." The statement triggered a burst of surprised laughter from the assembled press, breaking the tension and recasting the narrative in one deft stroke. I was no longer just the victimized spouse or the embattled CEO. I was a woman speaking a truth that many professional women would recognize. The irony that this same blindness made him the perfect target for those attempting to manipulate our stock is not lost on me. Those behind this scheme assumed that personal humiliation would cloud my professional judgment, that a woman dealing with marital betrayal would be too emotionally compromised to protect her institution. I straightened, my voice taking on an edge of steel. They were mistaken. The questions came rapid fire after that, about Matt, about the marriage, about the timing of the Western Trust announcement, about the market manipulation allegations. I addressed each with the same measured composure, neither avoiding the personal dimensions nor allowing them to overshadow the professional significance. "Mrs. Reynolds," called out a journalist from the Wall Street Journal, "are you and Dr. Reynolds planning to reconcile given these new developments?" It was the question I had been anticipating, the one that sought to reduce this complex situation to a simple personal drama. My husband and I will be addressing our personal relationship privately, as all couples should. Today's press conference is about protecting this institution, its shareholders, and its customers from a sophisticated attempt at market manipulation. I would ask that you respect that distinction. Another reporter pressed. But surely your husband's actions, the affairs, the planned departure, influenced your handling of this crisis? I met her gaze directly. Every leader brings their full self to moments of crisis, including their personal experiences. I'm no different, but the strength of our institution lies in its systems and its people, not in the personal life of its CEO. First National's security protocols functioned exactly as designed, protecting our customers and our shareholders, regardless of who was involved. As the press conference concluded, I could see from the expressions of the executive team that we had successfully shifted the narrative. The story was no longer bank CEO's husband arrested for fraud, but rather First National uncovers market manipulation scheme ahead of major acquisition. Stepping away from the podium, I felt a curious lightness. The careful compartmentalization I had maintained for so long, the professional CEO entirely separate from the accommodating wife, had finally dissolved. Whatever came next, it would be as my complete integrated self, neither hiding my capabilities nor diminishing my personal experiences. Gordon approached as the media began to disperse, tablet in hand. First National stock has already rebounded 3 points since your announcement. The short sellers are scrambling to cover their positions. I nodded, unsurprised. And Western Trust? Their board just voted unanimously to proceed with the accelerated timeline. The merger announcement is being extraordinarily well received. As we returned to the executive suite, Donna met me at the elevator with an update that caught me off guard. Mrs. Reynolds? Dr. Reynolds is here. He's waiting in your office. Matt stood at the window of my office, gazing out at the cityscape that had been the backdrop of my professional life for years. He had changed from the detention center jumpsuit into clothes that must have been delivered to him after his release. A simple button-down shirt and slacks that lacked his usual sartorial precision. His reflection in the glass showed a man, still processing the seismic shifts in his reality. He turned as I entered, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. The confidence that had been his defining characteristic throughout our marriage was notably absent, replaced by something more tentative, more authentic. I saw your press conference, he said, gesturing toward the television mounted on the wall, now muted, but still showing financial analysts discussing the day's dramatic events. It was remarkable. I set my portfolio on the desk, maintaining a professional distance between us. Thank you. Though I doubt you came here to compliment my media skills. No, Matt acknowledged, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't even know exactly. To apologize? To explain? To try to understand how we got here? He gestured helplessly at the space between us. 10 years, Sarah. 10 years! And I never knew who you really were. That's not entirely accurate, I corrected him, settling into my chair. You knew exactly who I was. You simply chose to see only the parts that fit your preferred narrative. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth of my words without the defensive reaction that would have been typical just days ago. The hospital. Called while I was being processed out. They've suspended my surgical privileges pending an ethics investigation. A bitter smile crossed his lips. Apparently, sleeping with nurses and patients' relatives violates professional standards, even when you haven't committed financial fraud. Are you surprised? I asked, genuinely curious about his thought process. That there are consequences for my actions? I suppose I shouldn't be. He sank into one of the visitor chairs across from my desk, suddenly looking exhausted. The thing is, Sarah, I've been living in a world where there weren't consequences. Not for me. Star surgeon, department head, hospital board member. I started believing I was somehow above the ordinary rules. The self-awareness was unexpected, a glimpse of reflection that had been notably absent throughout our marriage. And me? I asked. Where did I fit in this consequence-free world you'd constructed? Matt looked up, meeting my gaze directly. You were the supportive wife, the one who kept everything running smoothly at home while I focused on my important work, the one who nodded and smiled when I explained basic financial concepts that you probably understood better than I ever could. And you never questioned that? Never wondered about my education, my ambitions, my capabilities? I assumed I knew, he admitted. When we met, you said you worked at First National in executive leadership. I immediately thought executive assistant, because he trailed off, the recognition of his own bias finally dawning on him. Because what successful executive would be at that charity event alone in a simple dress, without the trappings you associated with power? I finished for him. And rather than correct your assumption, I decided to see how long it would take. You to actually ask me about my career, which I never did, Matt acknowledged, the full weight of this revelation evident in his expression. Not once in 10 years. The silence that followed was heavy with the accumulated weight of a decade of miscommunication and unspoken truths. Outside my office, I could hear the muted activity of the executive floor, the banking empire continuing to function smoothly despite the personal drama unfolding within these walls. When did you become CEO? Matt finally asked. 3 years. Ago. Before that, I was COO for 4 years, and Senior Vice President of Operations before that. There was an announcement in the business section, he recalled slowly. I remember seeing your photo one morning at breakfast. I mentioned that. You looked like someone at my wife's bank and you just smiled and said, "How funny," before changing the subject. I remembered that morning clearly, the momentary hope that he'd finally make the connection, followed by the familiar disappointment when he immediately dismissed the possibility that the powerful woman in the newspaper could be the same person, who shared his bed. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Initially it was a test, to see if you'd take enough interest in my life to ask. Then it became an experiment. How long could it continue before you noticed? And eventually, it was simply the status quo. Our marriage operated on the understanding that your career was significant while mine was incidental." Matt winced at the accuracy of my assessment. "And now? What happens now, Sarah?" The question hung between us, encompassing far more than just the immediate future. What happened to a marriage built on fundamental misperception once that illusion was shattered? What happened to a man whose entire self-concept had been upended in the space of 24 hours? What happened to a woman who had finally integrated her carefully compartmentalized identities? "Now we make decisions based on reality rather than comfortable fictions," I replied, my tone softening slightly. "The charges against you have been reduced but not eliminated. Your career will require significant rebuilding. Our marriage—" I paused, considering my words carefully. "Our marriage existed under conditions that no longer apply. We need to determine if there's anything worth salvaging without those conditions." "And is there?" Matt asked quietly. "From your perspective, is there anything worth saving?" I studied the man I had married a decade ago, trying to separate the actual person from both the idealized image I had initially fallen for and the disappointing reality I had come to resent. Somewhere beneath the arrogance and entitlement was someone who had genuinely dedicated his life to healing others, who had shown flashes of compassion and insight that had attracted me in the first place. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "What I do know is that any relationship between us moving forward would have to be fundamentally different from what we've had. It would require you to actually see me, all of me, and for me to stop enabling your blindness." Matt nodded slowly, accepting this assessment. "And professionally? What happens with the investigation? The evidence increasingly suggests you were a pawn in a larger scheme. The affairs were real and will have their own consequences, but the financial crimes appear to have been manufactured by someone with substantial resources and technical capabilities." "Amanda Winters," Matt said grimly, "using me to get to you because of her father's death." "That appears to be the case, though the investigation is still developing." My phone buzzed with a message from Gordon. "SEC has frozen trading accounts of 3 hedge funds connected to Wintercrest Financial. Amanda Winters and Vanessa Crane being brought in for questioning. Full statement expected by morning." I showed the message to Matt, whose expression hardened. "They used my worst qualities against me. My ego, my wandering eye, my dismissiveness toward your career. If I hadn't been so me, none of this would have worked." The self-recognition, though belated, was something I hadn't expected from him. Perhaps the public humiliation and professional consequences had triggered a level of introspection previously absent. "True," I acknowledged. "But it's also true that if I had been more direct about my position years ago, rather than allowing the misperception to continue, we might have addressed the fundamental problems in our relationship before they reached this point." For a moment, we sat in silence, 2 successful professionals who had failed spectacularly at the basic communication necessary for a genuine partnership. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I'd like to try," Matt said finally. "Not to save what we had. I can see now that wasn't healthy for either of us. But to maybe build something new, based on who we actually are rather than who we pretended to be." I met his gaze, searching for the sincerity behind his words. That would require significant changes, Matt. Not just in how you see me, but in how you see yourself. I know, he said quietly. And I can't promise I'll get there. But the past 24 hours have been clarifying. Sometimes you need to lose everything to see what really matters. 3 months passed with the rhythmic efficiency that had always characterized my professional life, though now that same, purposeful momentum extended into my personal affairs as well. The Western Trust acquisition had proceeded smoothly, creating the financial powerhouse we had envisioned while generating substantial shareholder value. First National stock had not only recovered from the manipulation attempt, but had reached new heights as the market responded positively to both the merger and the transparent handling of the crisis. The SEC investigation into Amanda Winters and her associates had resulted in multiple indictments for securities fraud, market manipulation, and identity theft. The elaborate scheme, using Matt's actual indiscretions as cover for manufactured financial crimes, had unraveled completely once exposed to scrutiny. Amanda Winters now faced substantial prison time, her vendetta against Matt for her father's death having backfired spectacularly. As for Matt and me, we had established a cautious separation, not quite divorce, but a deliberate disentangling of our daily lives to determine what, if anything, might be salvageable. He had moved into a downtown apartment while working to rebuild his professional reputation. The hospital ethics committee had issued a formal censure but allowed him to retain limited privileges, acknowledging that while his personal behavior had been problematic, his surgical skills still saved lives. I stood at the window of my office, watching the late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the financial district. My reflection showed a woman who appeared fundamentally unchanged. The same tailored suit, the same confident posture, the same thoughtful expression. Yet internally, everything had shifted. The careful compartmentalization that had defined my existence for a decade had dissolved, replaced by an integrated identity that no longer required hiding or diminishment in any context. A gentle knock at the door announced Donna's presence. "Mrs. Reynolds, your car is ready, and these just arrived from the printer." She placed a stack of business cards on my desk, identical to my previous ones except for one significant detail. These read, "Sarah Mitchell Reynolds," incorporating my maiden name as a subtle but meaningful reclamation of identity. "Thank you, Donna. Please let Frank know I'll meet him downstairs." Today marked my first public speaking engagement since the events that had briefly made me the subject of national business news. The Women's Leadership Conference had invited me to deliver a keynote address on authentic leadership in crisis, an opportunity to reshape the narrative around both the attempted market manipulation and the unusual dynamics of my marriage. As I gathered my notes, my phone buzzed with a text from Matt. "Good luck with your speech today. They're lucky to hear from the real you." The message reflected the tentative new understanding we had established during our weekly conversations, sometimes tense, sometimes surprisingly insightful, but always grounded in a newfound commitment to seeing each other clearly. Whether these discussions would lead to reconciliation remained uncertain, but they had already facilitated a more honest relationship than we had managed in 10 years of marriage. The elevator descended smoothly to the lobby, where Frank waited to escort me to the conference venue. As we walked through the main banking hall, I noticed employees straightening slightly as I passed, not from fear, but from a new kind of respect. The events of that tumultuous week had transformed me in their eyes from merely a competent executive to a leader who had faced both professional and personal crises with remarkable steadiness. "Mrs. Reynolds," Frank said as we approached the car, "the conference organizers called to confirm there will be media present for your address. Do you want to revise any of the talking points?" I shook my head, settling into the back seat. "No. Revisions necessary. Complete transparency worked 3 months ago. It will work today." As the car merged into afternoon traffic, I reviewed my notes one final time. The speech wasn't just about the attempted market manipulation or even about the unusual dynamics of my marriage. It was about the cost of compartmentalization, the price paid by those who divide themselves into acceptable fragments to navigate a world that isn't ready for their whole self. The woman who had once been content to be underestimated, to be seen as just a wife in one context while commanding a financial empire in another, had vanished. In her place was someone both more vulnerable and more powerful, a leader whose authority now stemmed not from careful image management, but from the authentic integration of all her identities and experiences. Whatever happened with Matt, whatever challenges awaited First National, whatever new attempted manipulations might target me in the future, I would face them as my complete self. No more hiding, no more diminishment, no more allowing others to define my capabilities or limitations. Just Sarah Mitchell Reynolds, in full. The Women's Leadership Conference filled the grand ballroom of the Westview Hotel with over 500 attendees, executives, entrepreneurs, and emerging leaders from across the financial sector. The buzz of conversation quieted as I approached the podium, the spotlight creating a momentary isolation that allowed for a final breath of preparation before addressing the crowd. "Good evening," I began, surveying the sea of attentive faces. 3 months ago, I stood before a different audience, news cameras and financial reporters, to address what appeared to be a personal scandal involving my husband. Today, I want to share the real story behind those headlines, not as a cautionary tale, but as an examination of the invisible barriers many of us create in our professional lives. For the next 30 minutes, I spoke candidly about the experience, not just the market manipulation attempt and its resolution, but the decade-long division I had maintained between my professional and personal identities. The audience listened with unusual intensity, many nodding in recognition at the compromises and compartmentalization that had characterized my marriage. The most powerful revelation wasn't discovering my husband's betrayal, I told them, or even uncovering the financial scheme targeting our bank. It was recognizing how complicit I had been in my own diminishment, how by allowing myself to be underestimated in one aspect of my life, I had reinforced the very barriers I was working to dismantle in my professional capacity. After the speech, during the reception that followed, a constant stream of women approached to share similar experiences. Stories of professional accomplishments hidden from romantic partners, of capabilities deliberately downplayed to maintain relationship harmony, of exhausting double lives maintained to navigate contradictory expectations. "Your situation was extreme," one bank vice president confided, "but the pattern is so familiar. My husband still introduces me as working at a financial company rather than as the head of risk management for a major investment firm, and I've never corrected him." As I drove home that evening, these conversations lingered in my thoughts. My personal story had clearly struck a chord, suggesting that my experience, while unusual in its specifics, reflected a broader pattern many professional women recognized: the challenge of being fully seen, of having one's complete self acknowledged and respected across all contexts, was evidently more common than I had realized. My downtown penthouse welcomed me with quiet elegance, a space I had reclaimed entirely as my own in Matt's absence. The familiar furnishings now arranged according to my preferences alone, the walls newly adorned with artwork I had selected without consideration for anyone else's taste. This physical transformation of my living space mirrored the internal shift in how I occupied the world. A package waited on the entry table, a book-sized parcel with Matt's handwriting on the label. Opening it revealed a first edition of Financial Institutions and Markets, the textbook I had studied in graduate school, with a simple note. "Found this in a rare bookstore. Thought the CEO might appreciate it more than the bank employee I once believed you to be. Learning to see clearly, even when it's difficult." M. The gesture was characteristic of our recent interactions. Acknowledgements of past blindness paired with small efforts to demonstrate new awareness. Neither overly sentimental nor presumptuous about our future, just quiet recognition of the reality I had always inhabited, but he had failed to see. My phone chimed with a message from Gordon. Latest SEC filing complete. Amanda Winter's assets. Frozen pending trial. Her attorneys making noise about a plea deal. Justice was proceeding on its methodical path. Amanda Winters would face consequences for her elaborate attempt at financial revenge, though I felt a complicated sympathy for her underlying motivation. Grief over her father's death had twisted into a destructive obsession, using Matt's moral failings as leverage for a much larger financial assault. Her sophisticated scheme had nearly succeeded. Would have succeeded, if not for the resilience of the institution I had built and my own refusal to be distracted by personal humiliation. Setting my bag aside, I moved to the wall of windows, overlooking the city lights. 3 months ago, I had stood at similar windows in a hotel room, feeling the acute pain of betrayal and the disorientation of having my carefully constructed life upended. Now that same view inspired a different perspective, one of integration rather than division, of strength found through vulnerability rather than compartmentalization. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Another meeting with the Western Trust Transition Team, a quarterly board presentation, and my weekly conversation with Matt, this time to discuss whether our tentative separation should progress toward formal divorce or attempt the difficult path of reconstruction. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of simple acknowledgement. The woman who had once been content to be just a wife in one context while commanding a financial empire in another had evolved into something more complete, more authentic, and ultimately more powerful. Sarah Mitchell Reynolds, in full, at last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.